Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Grants for the sanitation workers, the City Council goes to Beale Street, and much more tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by a roundtable of journalists. Look at some of the top headlines from recent days. Toby Sells, reporter with the Memphis Flyer. Thanks for being here again.
Hi, Eric.
Ryan Poe is a reporter with the Commercial Appeal. Thanks for being here. Burnell Smith, publisher, New Tri-State Defender. Thanks for being here.
Glad to be back.
And Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. We'll start with the grants to the sanitation workers, which it's been out there for a while, Bill. We haven't had a chance to talk about it on the show. It went in a strange direction at council this past week, but it went from $50,000 to $70,000. We can get into that part, but back up, why are these grants even existing, and who are they for? And go back to the history of this, because it is really fascinating.
Yeah, these are grants for 14 sanitation workers who were sanitation workers in 1968 when those workers went on strike. 4 of the 14 still work in the sanitation department almost 50 years later. The settlement of the strike involved the city and Mayor Henry Love's administration very reluctantly recognizing the union representing those workers, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Later, just a bit further down the road, came the time to decide about benefits. And the question was, okay, do the sanitation workers want to be on Social Security, or do they want to be a part of the city pension fund? And the union and the workers chose the Social Security fund. Now, all of these years later, it's very easy to look at it and say, well, they made the wrong choice because the pension is obviously paid more in retirement than Social Security does, which is why some of these workers worked for a very long time and are still working today. But in the atmosphere of 1968, what I've heard is that what happened is that the workers and the union looked at the strike, which was much more than a labor dispute, and said, if we take the pension, is there a chance that this administration, which has not been our friend and which has fought us tooth and nail, could they take that pension back? Could they take Social Security back?
Right, and they went with the Social Security. I'm amazed at a number of things about it. One that is out there, Burnell. The other is that 14 of these guys who are still working, and every day, I assume, and working a route. I mean, I was born in 1968, and these guys, they go through that, and they're still there. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, a couple of things. One is, clearly, I think that the fact that the gesture was made to try and give them additional benefit and really help alleviate some of the economic pressures, I think makes sense, particularly almost, we're up on the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination, which the reason he was in Memphis was to really, help with that labor dispute. But I think it was also sweet poetic justice that the number went from 50,000 to 70,000 based upon an error, if you will, of the administration in a rush to do the right thing. But I think ultimately nobody can look at this situation and say, hey, these guys, people like Mr. Nickelberry and others don't deserve, a measure of a recompense for, all that they've been through and all that they've represented. In the city. So, I think kudos to both the administration and the city council for getting it right.
We should also say that the 1968 decision to be on Social Security instead of the city pension cannot be taken back under the Harrington administration. The workers were actually converted to the city's pension system, and the attorneys and the federal regulators stepped in and said, nope, you made the decision. Back then.
But Ryan, you want to walk us through how did we get from 50 to 70 and what went on in council that caused that increase?
Well, yeah, there was basically just a wording error on the part of the administration. They also said in the resolution that it was a retirement, that the 4 employees who are still working would only get their grants on retirement, which was an accident as well. So they were trying to come back and reconfigure the resolution, and at one point they're just going on and on, arguing. And then Councilman Bill Morrison stands up and says, "It's not that much money. Let's just give them $70,000.
Right.
Be done with it." And so that's what you saw.
And somebody, I can't remember who it was who said, I'm not going to be the guy who votes to lower the grants to the sanitation workers. I mean, I don't care if it was a mistake, but I'm not going on record for that. And I think, maybe it was Frank Colvett who said, look, this was long overdue anyway. It's another $280,000. We should just go ahead with it. Also, we'll stick with City Council because they've been busy lately. And Bill, Beale Street, and we'll talk about the issues which we've talked about management of Beale Street and so on. But I turned to the Daily News, our paper, and I'm reading a story about City Council goes to Beale Street on a Saturday night, and you went with them.
Yes, I did.
And at 11 midnight, you were there till what, 1 in the morning?
Till 1 in the morning.
And this was maybe my favorite piece that has come out recently. I loved every word of it. It was great. Kudos to Bill. Yeah.
I know, and as Toby said earlier, like I want the backstory. I want the off-the-record stuff that happened on Beale Street with City Council. But tell us what they were trying to get at. I mean, it was a serious sort of visit, an alcohol-free visit to Beale Street to get into the heart of some of the issues about Beale Street bucks and security and so on.
Yeah, the City Council formed a task force just a little while back after they lowered the cover charge to get onto Beale Street from $10 to $5, and they said, let's have a task force and let's really look at this whole issue of the cover charge to get on Beale Street on Saturday night after 10 o'clock. And let's come up with some recommendations to the full council. And it's not just council members on the task force. It's Jim Holt with Memphis in May, Jennifer Oswalt with the Downtown Memphis Commission, Joellen Sullivan with the merchants, and James Clark, who's also a merchant on the street as well. So they've had their organizational meetings, and then they get to this point and they said, let's go to Beale Street Saturday night at 11 o'clock. We'll all come in from different entrances, different checkpoints, pay our $5, and we will see how the police handle this. And that's what they did for 2 hours on Saturday night. They went in some nightclubs. They spent a lot of time on the street itself, outside, asked a lot of questions of police, made a lot of observations, ranging from Council Chairman Berlin Boyd walking into Handy Park and saying, can you smell the marijuana?
Yeah.
And yes, you could.
Right.
And to Patrice Robinson, who is on the council, looking around at one point and saying, so you have to pay to get on the street,
right.
which is one of the many issues that's being explored here.
Yeah, Brunel, you all are located on Beale Street, and in full disclosure, you're more than an objective participant in this debate. But do you think, was that important or was that for show? I mean, are you glad to see the task force get down there and kind of get in the heart of the matter?
I think it's really important to have a firsthand understanding of the dynamics that drive some of these decisions, particularly the decision to charge patrons to come on the street and to understand the crowd control, if you will, and the other dynamics in terms of disbursements of police and that kind of thing. I think the only way you can really create policy that makes sense is to really have a firsthand view. So I commend the City Council and the task force for going down there. I think the consistent experiences, though, I mean, because I think on any given weekend you may, there's different experiences at different times that things are going on. But I think they did see at one point how the lines formed and the experience that, particularly when you have tourists and other people that are in town, if you got a line to get on, what is America's most iconic street, already you're in a difficult position. Right. So I think that that there are some decisions that have to be made about how you manage the crowd, how you deal with the paying, the entrance into some of the some of the issues that the very valid issues that some of the merchants have relative to their revenues and that kind of thing. But I think definitely it was a good thing.
Right. It also, I would say, Ryan, I mean, this speaks to, it's a very activist council right now, I think. And some of that's Berlin Boyd, the current chairman. And he's very hands-on. It's not surprising they were rewriting the resolution in some level. We'll talk about Urban Art Commission. Do you think there'll be more of this? Do you think it comes from Berlin, or is it the makeup of the council? I mean, you spend a lot of time with them.
I think it's the makeup of the council. I think that everyone has a vested interest in seeing the council take over more of the responsibilities that have typically been farmed out to these organizations like the Beale Street Tourism Development Authority. They abolished that organization earlier this year. And I think you're going to see more of that kind of, maybe not abolishing those organizations, but kind of more oversight of them, more activism like you're talking about.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, Toby.
Just back on Beale Street Bucks, I know Berlin Boyd has talked in the past about visiting other cities and seeing how they do it, especially Bourbon Street in New Orleans. And if you've ever been there, Bourbon Street, the entertainment district is many blocks long, and Beale Street's maybe 3 blocks, something like that, 3-4 blocks long. And there's no cover charge on Bourbon Street. It gets rowdy down there without a doubt, and they've got mounted police down there, and there are hiccups and security issues down there. But I think if we can go and visit some of these other places like Chairman Boyd has talked about in the past, we can find other ways to do this and maybe do it without the cover charge. I know that Mayor Strickland and police and the Downtown Memphis Commission, they say, Beale Street Bucks is the only thing that works on Beale Street for us to kind of, thin the crowd and bring security. But I think there's probably another way, and hopefully they'll explore things and go find them.
I just hope the task force got the crowns of the flashing task force.
If they did, Bill did not get a photo of that. There were some photos. There was no dancing. There was no drinking.
They were pretty low key, and the emphasis was on just seeing how you handle this. It was admittedly a light night. This is the part of the year when it's really hot outside.
Yeah.
So, but I think what's important is that they did see kind of the second and third waves of people that you get at around midnight and after midnight, when the street does fill up pretty quickly, and it's like, where did all these folks come from?
Yeah. Well, we'll move on to a story you've been covering that we've talked about here. I think all of us, everyone at the table has covered one way or another, is the rape kit backlog. What's going on with that, Toby?
Some kind of new moves, I think. There's a lawsuit against the city and those folks. There's 40 plaintiffs now in the Jane Doe versus the City of Memphis lawsuit. They were back in court last week, very recently. Lawyers kind of squabbling over who gets what documents and gets to see what. But it's going forward. So far, it's not a class action. The city attorney said that he kind of doubts that it's going to get class action status. But just on Monday, there was kind of an incredible case that was just prosecuted here that just really kind of showed what we're talking about here. There was a rape 16 years ago, 2001, and when police came to investigate, they found a set of dentures on the street where it happened. They collected those dentures, got the rape kit from the victim, bagged it up, put it in a storage locker, and nobody looked at it for 16 years. And now an assistant district attorney got the evidence out, sent it back to the TBI, and they did find partial DNA match on the dentures, but more than that, they found the guy's name on the dentures. And had somebody looked at that 16 years ago and saw the name there, I mean, boom, kind of open and closed case. And so now this victim has had delayed justice for 16 years on something like that. So I'm thinking with something like that, when they with stories like this, when they go to court, I think the city council and mayor one day in the future, they're going to have to probably shell out a lot of money in a budget one day to either settle this case or pay the litigants or something like that. So down the road, it could be a big issue.
And I call it a backlog, and some people just call it a complete mess. I mean, a backlog is a soft word for it, as if they were going to get to it. And the truth was they were storing in a lot of cases these rape kits, and they weren't getting to them until people like Megan Ebos, who's been on the show, a rape survivor and an advocate for this, started to raise a ruckus. People started to sue. So again, I probably shouldn't call it a backlog, or at least should acknowledge that. Other thoughts on that? I mean, where it goes from here, Bill?
Well, I mean, the other issue that arises is, did this person commit any other crimes during that time? This man had been to prison in the 1980s for killing a 6-year-old child in Washington State before the 2001 incident in Frazier. So that's the question. And in this lag here, when they just put these kits on a shelf and just effectively walked away from them. You know, the folks who did these things were doing other things.
Yeah, and it was a national. It happened everywhere. It was a national disgrace,
Yeah,
really.
Memphis,
I mean,
certainly not
yeah, I mean, it was one of the higher amounts, but I mean, cities around the country, it's breathtaking that this could happen, right?
And it arose because of a culture that kind of condoned rape in a lot of cases and ignored it. And I even this week, I'm still getting complaints. I got an email this week saying that a rape victim, alleged rape victim, went into the police and you know was turned away basically. Yeah. And the police are even looking into that right now. But yeah, it's just it's an ongoing problem, not just on the legal side, but on the enforcement side. There's still an ongoing kind of concern and pushback.
We'll stay with law enforcement, and there have been, we talked about this maybe happening, it's been talked about nationally, more raids on undocumented immigrants. You want to update us on what's been going on, Bill?
Yeah, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Service, ICE, has been started maybe about a week ago, visited 3 apartment complexes and began detaining people. We don't know what, if anything, they're charged with. We don't have a real count of how many people have been taken in. It seems to be maybe several dozen people, but it's definitely stepped up here. It's been stepped up since January, really, in some other parts of the country, but this is the week that it really hit hard here.
It does get to, you know, this whole thing of, you know, this is an outgrowth of the Trump administration, and, you know, you think elections don't matter. Elections matter, right? I mean, they are able to, you bring in Donald Trump, you bring in Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. They have a whole different approach than the previous administration. So there's some people listening saying, great, these people are undocumented, they shouldn't be here. Other people horrified or upset by what's going on.
Right, I think it certainly created some turmoil in the Latino community. And there's been a response from many of the activist agencies to really come to the assistance of many in the community, because it really created, in some sense, a sort of mass hysteria, because you really don't know, you know, how they were deciding who to arrest and who not to arrest, disrupting families. And then, of course, there was even an allegation that somehow MPD, the Memphis Police Department, was sort of assisting with this. So there's some trust issues there. So there's some legal community and other people that have sort of stepped in to really sort of calm the fears, if you will. But, you know, it is a reflection of the priorities that were expressed by the Trump administration, and you know, fairly or unfairly, they're executing.
Yeah.
We should say the Memphis Police Department has denied that they assisted ICE in any way.
Right, and Strickland has said that, you know, it gets the whole, what's a sanctuary city, and that it's really, I can't remember if it was Strickland specifically or someone from the administration told me, you know, these things really are more on the county, just the way the rules are set up in terms of if there's going to be local help for the federal government, it would go through the county, not MPD. But I think there's still, I mean, Strickland admitted when he was here that he still was learning about how all these rules work. It's a new world in terms of the federal government putting pressure on local governments around the country to do these things. Yeah,
when the Commercial Appeal broke the story, we went actually to one of the apartment complexes, and it was just amazing to see the fear in people. Right. People are honestly afraid. Bernal mentioned the turmoil in the community. It's more than that, though. It's people are afraid to even call the police now. You know, and that was a point that Latino Memphis director Mauricio Calvo mentioned. He said that this is going to work against law enforcement, actually, in the long run. So that's something to keep an eye on also.
Just a question for you. When you saw these ICE agents out there at these apartment complexes, were they wearing flak jackets? Were they all geared up, or what do they look like?
Well, we got there after they had already left, but from pictures that people took on the scene, they were wearing, you know, there was a kind of body armor kind of vests.
Right. So pretty scary.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like, you know, a kind of SWAT team kind of thing. Right. Well, not SWAT team, but you know.
It's not just somebody being served some papers.
Right.
I mean, this is a full.
This was an arrest team.
Yeah. We'll move a little bit here with 6-7 minutes left. Since we've last done a roundtable, federal judges, when it gets into politics and the federal government, Mark Norris, now the Senate Majority Leader in the state Senate, and Tommy Parker, partner at
Baker
Donaldson, thank you. Both nominated for the federal bench. Your thoughts, Bill, on those two?
Well, these appointments are still on their way to the Senate for confirmation. What this effectively did was to take Mark Norris out of the Republican primary race for governor. So we're seeing people fill that vacuum. He was the only West Tennessee candidate in the still forming Republican PAC. We should point out that Tommy Parker's appointment, what was unexpected to some degree, and people were going, okay, well, what's the vacancy there? Well, what happened is that Judge Daniel Breen in the Jackson, Tennessee part of the court had taken senior status. Judge Anderson here from the federal bench in Memphis moved over to Jackson, so that's the opening that we're talking about for that.
And Tommy Parker was a former assistant U.S. attorney.
A former assistant U.S. attorney, yeah. Yes.
Okay. We'll stay in politics, and the Democratic Party, and I'll turn to you, Burnell, in Shelby County has reformed, which I lost track that they had they had dissolved. I mean, honestly, right. I mean, you want to track some of the history of that and this new reformed party and what it means.
Essentially, there was a lot of turmoil. Of course, there were a number of consecutive elections where Democrats fared very poorly, but then there was also internal strife that ultimately led to a complete disbanding, if you will, of the party, dechartering of the party. And so ultimately over the years there's been planning and development, and ultimately this past Saturday there was a reorganization, if you will, where they were elected new entities. I think about 102 people that were there. There's about 135 seats that are available in terms of filling the full body of the party here in Shelby County, and it appeared to be very orderly. About 200 people attended. It looks like a more diverse coalition, if you will, and a lot of newcomers to the party, if you will, people who have not historically had kind of been involved, and you also see some activists, if you will, that have been really active in other things in the community. So I think it's an interesting redevelopment of the Democratic Party. Clearly, Shelby County is the strongest bastion of blue in the state of Tennessee, and I think it bodes well as we move into 2018 and 2019 in Shelby County, which will be very, very important elections as the Democratic Party here begins to get its feet underneath it.
Any thoughts on the Reform Party? You've watched these, you've tracked the problems the party had here, and
a lot of new blood elected. You actually had some people who have not been politically active in any way before, who are on the new grassroots council and the executive committee on this. You had some people who have been involved in the last year or so that we've seen of increased protest, who have decided to give this a try. People who are really more drawn to issues and pretty distrustful of both political parties have said, okay, let's see if there's something out there that we can do beyond the protest.
Right. Yeah.
They've jumped in the game, if you will.
We'll go back to, with a few minutes left, go back to City Council, because we brushed past it, which was my fault. The Urban Art Commission. So the Urban Art Commission was under the spotlight. I think I'll turn to Ryan here. It was, in part, Berlin Boyd, the chairman of the council, had some questions about how urban art worked. Talk about what went on and what the resolution of the issue was.
Yeah, we talked about activism earlier, a more active city council, and that's what you saw in this case. The Urban Art Commission had not been living up to council members' expectations as far as minority participation in public art programs, local artist participation. And so what the council did was they brought them to the table and demanded changes. Now, what happened most recently was the council kind of got two options. They could bring it in-house to the city. They could keep it with Urban Art Commission or some other group. And what they decided to do was keep it with Urban Art, except set much more strict restrictions on what they could what kind of their goals were.
Yeah, and Urban Art is funded by, it's 1% of capital spending, is that right, Bill? Automatically goes to Urban Art Commission?
1% of capital spending. They also have private donors as well, but it's a commitment that the city administration and the past council made quite some time ago to devote 1% of capital spending to public art.
And it's interesting, you know, I mean, as somebody who works downtown, you know, it's been part of this effort of getting rid of blight. And I don't know the specific murals I'm thinking of, but where they've taken some buildings that have been redeveloped and they put these, you know, local artists do these big murals. And I'll say, as somebody who walks downtown and is downtown all the time, people love those, you know. Right. And so I think, you know, Berlin Boy wanted to go out of his way and say, I wasn't trying to kill urban art and public art. I just wanted more accountability. I wanted more local participation. I wanted more minority participation. But
like that big mural that's there that you can see from AutoZone Park, you know, I think it's on the side of the press box, you know what I'm talking about? That great big one? That was done by an out-of-town artist, and that was some of the criticism that Urban Art was getting. You know, we've got these big projects, why can't we get local guys to do that? And Urban Art has always said, you know, we win if we bring in outside art. You know, it gives us a different perspective, and our artists go out of town and do jobs too, but on those great big ones like that, you know, that an out-of-town guy got that job, I think brought them a lot of criticism at Urban Art.
All right. Well, I think we'll end it there. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.